Hi, Phil here from Revive My Ride and welcome to the video, and in this one we're going to cover BMW E36 Vanos removal and refitting, and specifically for cars with the M52 engine, which is the straight 6 that was fitted to the BMW E36. So just quickly about the symptoms. So one of the symptoms everybody thinks of for Vanos is of course the Vanos rattle, which can be the gears or maybe even the tensioner. But the other issue you can get with the Vanos is it doesn't kick in at the high RPM, so you have low down power, but then as you rev the car you don't get any power at the top end. But actually you can also get the opposite of that, and that's what the case that we've got with ours.
So let's have a quick look at fault codes, because when you've got a Vanos issue you sometimes get some spurious fault codes coming up.
And we're using a little Creator C110 Plus fault code reader. Now, when you've got a stock-on Vanos like we've got, it can sometimes give sporadic camshaft sensor faults because when the RPMs are low, the sensor's not seeing what it expects to be seeing because the Vanos is stuck on. But just for info, we've replaced the sensor a couple of times and it just resides in here, just underneath in this sort of area. And this was before we realised we had potentially a Vanos problem. Yeah, so as with any of this sort of work, you're always best disconnecting the battery before you do anything, because then there's not a chance that the starter motor will engage and turn the engine, and also no chance that you'll get your hands trapped in something. So on this particular car, the battery's down in the boot or the trunk of the car, and as you can see, Matthew's disconnecting the earth side there. Yeah, so the first job is getting these engine covers, beauty covers off.
10mm socket.
Okay, so now we're going to start on the airbox side of the engine because we need some of this stuff out of the way for the work that's going to come later. The first thing we're going to do is disconnect the mass airflow meter. So it's just a little twisty connector there. And now there's a couple of clips that go onto the airbox just here and here. So we're going to pop those loose. And then over on the other side where we have this elbow, we're just going to disconnect the Jubilee where it goes onto the throttle. So next we're going to loosen off these securing bolts here that hold the airbox in place. This is an aftermarket alarm, so you probably won't have a siren in this place. But if your car is equipped with cruise control, you might find there's a small cruise control unit in this place that you undo at the same time.
So you just need to pull the intake hose loose at the MAF side and then the airbox can just be lifted out.
Now maybe in some other markets, maybe the US one for example, as you're taking that airbox out, there'll be a sensor you have to undo there. But in the UK we don't have one, as you can see.
And then we lifted the MAF out and the air intake elbow that's attached to it.
It should just peel off there, and there's a pipe underneath. So we just need to separate. There we go.
Yeah, and so as you can see, there was just this breather pipe that was plugged in the bottom that we had to undo as we took that mass airflow meter out of there. Yeah, so next we're going to remove this alternator cooling duct, and there's just a Jubilee down at the bottom that has to be loosened. So next we need to remove the radiator cover, and there's 4 cross point screws, 2 on each side to undo. And then normally there'd be a plastic clip either side, but we've got one missing here. But we do have one over at the other side to undo. Yeah, and so it should be possible just to lift that cover out of place now. Okay, so we're ready to get the fan out now. And there's a few different designs on the E36 to be honest, but on ours there's a little plastic clip at either side which we're going to undo. And then we'll introduce you to some tools in a minute for undoing the Viscous fan. And then once the fan's loosened, we should be able to lift out the fan and the cowling together as one unit. So Matthew will go ahead and undo these two clips. So just the one at the far side there. Trim tools come in really handy for this. So as you can see, that outer cowling's loose now, but it won't come out until the fan's ready to go. So let's have a quick look at how the fan's fastened in. Yeah, so hopefully you can see the nut that holds the fan to the engine. There's just a pulley there. And what you need, two tools really here at this point. So you can buy them as a kit. And the first one is a tool that holds the pulley steady, and then also you get this spanner, and that's for undoing the nut that you can see. And the only other thing to say is it's a left-hand thread, so when you're undoing this you'll be turning it clockwise as opposed to what you would normally expect, which would be anti-clockwise.
And it's going to be hard to show you on camera, so here's a diagram. So you use one tool to hold the pulley still, and you can see it goes over the pulley bolts here and here. And then you use the spanner from the kit to turn the fan.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
And this fan can get really tight, so sometimes you have to hit the end of the spanner with a hammer. And it helps if you have the assistance of somebody else who can hold the pulley still for you at the same time.
Yeah. Hey, there we go. Lovely.
And now you just need to lift the fan shroud and the fan out together as one unit. Now we're ready to remove the coil packs on our BMW M52 engine.
And there's two 10mm bolts that holds each coil pack in. So Matthew's just undoing those. Of course there's 6 coil packs with it being a 6-cylinder engine. Yeah, so for each one of them, once you've undone the retaining bolts, then you just lift up that silver locking tab, and then you can take the electrical plug out. And then of course you can lift the coil pack out like that.
And then we just work our way along doing all the rest of the coil packs, and the last bolt at the end you have to get a spanner on because of the restricted access. And just something to note is that cylinders 1 and 6 have an earthing strap on the bolts for the coil pack. And then about in the middle there's a little brown wire that goes to one of the bolts for the valve cover.
Yeah, so now we're ready to get this valve cover off. So Matthew's just undone the breather that was just on the right hand side there. And then we have a series of bolts all around the edges to undo.
And basically it's just all of the bolts that you can see around the outside edges of the valve cover.
So as you can see, all the wires that went to each one of the coil packs are still there, and obviously they connect into the harness, and it's this plug here. So if you twist that and pull, then that'll remove, and then it'll allow all those plugs to come out with the valve cover when we lift it off. Now we're almost ready to lift it off, but another thing you have to do is undo the oil filler. So you take the cap back off and put that off to one side.
And now there's just 4 bolts down the middle of the valve cover to undo, including this one here that has the brown earth wire on it.
There's an 8mm on the top.
There are 3 clips that tidy up these electrical cables, and you need to undo them to get the play you need to get that valve cover out from under them. And then it should just be possible to lift the valve cover off.
So we just need to pull this cover free that's over the intake camshaft, and it just pops on.
There we go, there we go.
Yeah, so now we're ready to bring the engine round to top dead center. And so you can turn the engine over by putting a socket onto the crank, which you can just see down there. It's a 22mm socket, and just a short ratchet will make it easy for you.
Right, getting close I think.
Yeah, leave it at that.
Right, okay.
Or maybe a tiny turn more, yeah. And what you'll find is these, the first lobe on each of the camshafts should point at an angle towards each other. So that's what we've done there. That's the point we knew that we could stop turning the crank.
So now there's a timing tool that we need to drop on at the back of the engine, but there's 3 studs that used to hold the valve cover in place that are in the way, so we need to remove each one of those.
And at the back of the camshaft you can see there's like a square section on each one of them. So that's the exhaust camshaft, and there's another one on the intake camshaft. And we have a timing tool now that we've got each one of these studs out, that can drop over those. And again, that's not only to lock them in place, but it's another guarantee that you've got the timing correct. Yeah, so this here, that's the camshaft locking tool that we're going to put on the back of the engine now. And so Matthew's just reaching in and he's going to drop it onto the squares that are on the back of the camshafts that I showed you just a minute ago. And you'll know it's on correctly because the squares will slide up into these slots, and also the blocks at each side will fit completely flat to the top of the head.
There's also a flywheel locking pin that you need to fit, but before you can do that you have to remove the little blue plug that's covering the hole. And I've put this screwdriver here and it's pointing down to where the blue plug is because it is actually quite hard to find because it gets dirty over the years. Now in theory this blue plug just pulls out, but what we found is because the bell housing is aluminium, there was corrosion on the inside and it bound that blue plug in really tight. So do whatever you need to, WD-40, a hook, pliers, screwdrivers. It took us at least an hour to get this plug out, so you've been warned.
Is it moving at all?
No, but...
I mean, I'm properly pulling on that.
And actually ours got wrecked, so Matthew had to buy a new one for when we finished the job to plug that hole back up.
Yeah, and once you got the plug out, then you have this flywheel pin which you now go and insert through the hole that the plug came out of.
So it's a bit of a reach down to insert the pin, and you might have to jiggle the crank using the socket that's on the crank, just a little bit left and right to get the pin to go in. But you should feel it click home when it's fully inserted.
And then the next step is to push the tensioner down, which you just do by hand. And then you insert just a 2mm piece of wire, and then it holds the tensioner down. And as you can see, the wire just goes above the little plastic ledge that you can see, and that just holds the tension off of the chain. So next step, we have to undo these two hex heads that you can see down here, and they're actually just access for getting to the bolts that's on the camshaft sprocket. So you just remove both of those and put them off to one side, and you should see that it reveals a port going through the casing to the sprocket bolt. And the next step is to loosen all four of the exhaust sprocket bolts, and we're using an E10 torque socket for this. So you can see two of them you can reach just above the sprocket, but two of them were reaching through those access ports where we took off the hex head covers a minute ago. And note you loosen them, you don't remove them at this stage. So that's enough once you've undone them a couple of turns. And now we're going to remove all of the extra stuff that's all bolted to this Vanos ready for removal. And some cars actually have a little plastic electrical harness clip that's mounted onto these two studs here, maybe for other regions, but this is a UK spec car and there isn't one there, so I'm just letting you know in case you do have one there. And we're just going to start with this lifting eye here, and there's two bolts that hold that on. So there's a 11mm bolt that's at the top that Matthew's undoing now, and then just underneath the oil connection there's a larger bolt there, and that one's a 13mm socket to get that out. And then we're just going to leave that in place for now because you can remove it entirely once you take the oil banjo connection off here. But in the meantime, we've got some other bolts along the front of the Vanos casing to undo. So now we just have 6 bolts to undo on the lower part of the Vanos casing. And 2 of them you'll need a deep socket for, and these are all 10mm under here. Yeah, so just for reference, the 2 that were just undone, you can just see the end of the stud there, and the second one here, and that's the ones we needed the long sockets for. And now we've got 4 more, and you just use a normal socket for these, so that's 6 in total. And all of these will probably be quite tight because these nuts haven't been off since the car was built. So we actually have one more nut that's behind before this casing can come off, but there's a few other things to do first. So next we're going to take this banjo connection off, which is the oil feed to the Vanos system, and that'll allow us to get the lifting eye off and a few other things. So this is a 19mm spanner for this, and it's a good idea to have some rag handy, just in case a little bit of oil comes out of it. There shouldn't be a lot. So now we can take the lifting eye out of the way because it was really the banjo connection that was preventing access for that coming off. And now with that off, we can see the last remaining nut to undo there. So we're just going to undo that, and that should be the last of the bolts for the Vanos casing. And now we just need to disconnect the electrical connector to the Vanos solenoid, because the solenoid's going to come off with the casing. So we're just putting a little bit of rag underneath the bottom edge of the casing so that if there is a little bit of oil there, then it catches it. And just in preparation for removing this, I'm just going to give it a few taps. Just there and at the bottom. And this will just help free off that casing a little bit for when we start sliding that out.
So this is the special tool that you use for advancing the exhaust camshaft during the Vanos removal.
And what you have to do is, it has this little boss here, and that fits inside the exhaust camshaft sprocket. And then this little peg goes on one of the teeth of the gear wheel. And so you just slot it in place. And the idea is for the removal that you move this lever clockwise, and at the same time you move the casing outwards from the car. And to be honest, this part of the job, it helps if there's more than one of you, because you kind of need 3 hands. So Matthew's going to step in. I'm just going to move this handle as far clockwise as it'll go, and Matthew's going to try to move the casing out.
Yeah, there we go. We're free. We're free.
Yeah, you can star in this and say what it is if you want.
Yeah, so this is the inside of the Vanos unit. There are a number of oil ways in here. The input is on the end here with the banjo bolts that we saw earlier on, and then within this casing here, which unbolts, there are 2 oil ways. One goes over this passage in the front here, and that pushes a piston back. And there's one that runs to the back of the cylinder, and that pushes the piston forwards. And this here, the solenoid, directs the oil to either push the piston back or push it out. So the seals go around the edge of the pistons.
And what you were saying effectively is that extends or retracts.
Indeed. It does indeed. So we can see here if we hold it up that
oh yeah,
pull up and that will pull down. And these should have less movement in them than that. So that shows that there is bearing wobble in there. That bearing needs replacing. It should be able to move smoothly in and out. A tiniest amount of movement, but a bit less than that.
Okay, it's a wrap.
Great.
Okay, so that's the end of the first video. So Vanos removal on the BMW M52 engine. And there's going to be a part 2, which is refurbishing the Vanos and then fitting it. And refitting is not just the opposite of removal, so it's worth watching because there's a few hints and tips in that. So anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos just like this, then please consider subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Okay, bye for now.
Not doing that. Let me do that again, because I look so incompetent that I can't even bloody do that. It's a desperate state of affairs, isn't it? Right, okay.
You're having a bit of a bad time of it. You got it.
I've got it. I've got it. Have you ever worked with a more incompetent mechanic, Phil?
Just some annoying cyclists going past. Don't worry about them. Might have alienated all my cyclist viewers then. So yeah.
Just use that. Oh, for fuck's sake.